Hello, and welcome to today's web seminar, Take Your Mobile App Test Automation Program to the Next Level, sponsored by Keynote and featuring speakers Chris Karnacki, Director of Solutions, and Eric Elkins, Solutions Lead. I'm your host and moderator, Beth Romanek. Thanks for joining us today. Before I hand it over to the speakers, I'll explain the controls you see on your console. The 3 panels on your screen can be moved around and resized. There will be demos during this web seminar, so if you'd like to make your slides panel full screen, click the square in the upper right corner of that window. At the bottom of your console is a widget toolbar. Through the additional resources widget on the right, you can download a PDF of the speaker's slides today. If you experience any technical issues, please let us know through the question field beneath the panels. Our responses can be read in the Q&A window to the left. This is also how you'll submit questions. There will be a Q&A session at the end, so feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. And finally, to optimize your bandwidth for the best viewing experience possible today, please close any unnecessary applications you have running in the background. This event is being recorded and will be made available to watch on demand. Once the recording is ready, you'll get an email with instructions about how to access the presentation. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to our first speaker, Chris.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you, audience, for taking the time to join us here today. My name is Chris Karnacki. I'm a Director of Solutions at Sigos Mobile Testing. Been in the industry for about 7 years, very well versed in both manual and automated testing, specifically for mobile phones and tablets. With me, I have Eric Elkins. Eric, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yep, thanks, Chris. My name is Eric. I'm a Solutions Lead here at Sigos. I've been in the space for about 2.5 years. I've been working very closely with Chris that entire time.
All right, thank you, Eric. So again, we're going to take some time today to talk about how to take your mobile app test automation program to the next level. But let's walk through first high-level concepts to get started here. So mobile and agile change your test process. As you're all well aware, today's users expect their applications to just work on their devices and on their device. It's not enough to say it works on iPhones and it works on Androids. They want to know that it works on their specific phone or tablet. And you've got all of these different pieces that have to come together in order to make sure that you have good test coverage. You've got more platforms to test on, and you have to test on them. You can't just skip them. On top of that, you've got the higher expectations in general from mobile users versus desktop. Faster release cycles. So we're generally seeing 2-week sprints, maybe monthly releases for these applications, now that many development shops have gone to this new agile versus waterfall process. You've got iOS and Android to support. And it's not just iOS and Android, of course. It's the different iterations of the operating systems. It's the different hardware for especially Android, even a little bit so iOS as well. So your testing effort basically balloons. It gets much larger. The only way to get the product out the door, given your time to market needs, and keep up with your development is through test automation. So it's not enough anymore just to manually test or manually spot test. It's very important that you automate at least part of the process, and that is just a given today. So given that people know the importance of automation and even how a small automation program can free up your expensive manual testing resources to do more exploratory testing maybe, test functions that can't be automated, spend time doing some negative testing, why stop at a small automation program? There's some things that don't seem to lend themselves to automation, but given the right test platform and a few tips and tricks, you can grow that small platform into a much larger one. This will free up those resources even further and can make you look like a leader within your organization. So, quick poll. Of your organization's mobile development projects, what percentage have any testing automated? So, go ahead and select a button or click a radio button, again, on which percentage you have any of it automated. So just the act of offloading those repetitive actions that manual testers can find boring, may experience fatigue, and also offloading those testers so they can do more high-value manual testing can really increase your test coverage exponentially. Now, Eric, what are typically the goals of customers that you speak with that are trying to automate or that are moving to automation today?
Typically they're starting the automation process. So they'll be looking at, what's the first step in that? Is it maybe a build acceptance? Are they automating that part of the process? Is it a regression suite that they're looking to automate? That's typically the first step in automation, and most of the customers that I'm talking to are in that initial beginning phase of automation.
All right, thank you for that. So let's take a look here. So this is about what we see in the market with people that we speak to. About just under half of you are saying less than 25%. So you're doing some automation. Now is a good time to reevaluate and see what else can we automate. And through today's webinar, we'll show you 4 tricks, 4 things that you can do to accelerate that automation and grow that to maybe 25 to 50%. Some of you move to 50 to 75%. So thank you for that input. And you can see the numbers here. So why aren't more companies automating mobile testing? There was a percentage of you that weren't doing any automation, or you weren't sure, or again, that low percentage. This infographic here shows a survey that was performed in 2015 that shows what percentage of different test functions are actually being automated. The unit tests, approximately 53%, some functional testing, all the way down to test environment provisioning. So some of these things don't seem to lend themselves to automation, but we'll show you how they actually can be automated. And what we see is that mobile projects have little or no automation, and contrast that with that same type of data across all projects, including desktop applications, web apps, websites. Generally, more automation is in place for desktop. Now, given the time to market and quality pressures, especially for mobile, why is that? Well, one reason we see is the trade-off between the current release and future release planning. Sure, if you spend some time now on automating, your next release will go faster. But when you're behind on your current release, that's really hard to do. We have the same issue in our development cycle, and automation projects can seem daunting. You have hundreds of test cases that need to be automated. It's not a quick, fast investment with a fast return. It's really difficult to draw a line and set aside time to invest in that automation program and get things working, even though you know it's going to save you time later down the road. The second reason is specific to mobile. There are additional complexities of mobile testing and test automation that you don't have on the desktop side. First is that mobile is still relatively new. Desktop's been around for quite a while. So the skill sets that automation engineers have may or may not relate to testing on mobile devices. And that's something we see a lot. Automation engineers, very skilled, very knowledgeable about desktop automation. Doesn't always translate to mobile. So there's a learning curve. In addition, it's really important to test on real devices. Emulators just don't cut it. But getting all of your team access to devices can be a challenge. The development team doesn't typically have a function for sourcing devices. Someone else has to manage this for them. And if you have a geographically diverse group, which is often the rule instead of the exception, managing boxes or drawers or closets of devices in different locations is a really difficult proposition. So it's daunting, it's hard to dedicate the resources that are already overstretched, and mobile adds its own complexities. So in this webinar, we're going to cover 4 tricks to help take your mobile app testing automation program to the next level. There are, of course, many more, but these are 4 we see being the most helpful to create or grow your automation program. So first is the setup of your test environment. This can range anywhere from what device or devices to test: iOS, Android, Windows, BlackBerry, phones, tablets. How to load your new application to those devices. You've got a new build of your application, a new build of your website. You want to make sure that that device or devices can test it. What staging or test or QA servers or services to connect to. Things may be behind your firewall. They may not be publicly accessible, depending on your actual application or site. All of this can seem like a very daunting task, even when you're performing manual testing. Add to it the complexity and visibility that an automation program brings, and it can quickly, very quickly that we see, become overwhelming. If you can automate this setup process, you can take a big load off your testers' shoulders and let them focus on creating well thought out, high coverage test plans. So setting up the test environment using automation. What are some advantages? Well, it helps to ensure that every test is working from proper prerequisites. So that could mean that you're testing on the same iPhone or iOS hardware with the same version of the Apple iOS operating system. Same goes for Android, especially given the many different permutations and combinations of Android devices and operating systems you could have. So make sure that you're always testing from a proper standpoint. There's no ambiguity on whether or not you're testing on the proper version, the proper carrier, the proper hardware. It also cuts down on those repetitive manual tasks that can be taxing for your manual test team. Those setup options oftentimes get skipped or don't have as much oversight to them because it seems like it's very mundane. But in fact, it's very important that you have that set, known device setup to test against. So what test environment needs set up? We mentioned on the last slide, the new build of your mobile application. Your developers have a new build, whether it's sitting in your CI system, so something like Jenkins, TeamCity, Git. You need to deliver that application now to the mobile device or devices. Now, how do you do that? Okay. Of course, you don't want to have a box of devices in front of you. How do you get it to some remote device platform, some device cloud? And then how do you make sure that you're hitting the right targeted servers or systems that that mobile device has to connect to? Are those servers or systems behind your firewall? Are they accessible from the carrier network, AT&T, Verizon, and so on? How do you make sure that you're testing against the right environment? And that's important, of course, because you don't want to get through an entire test cycle and just determine, oops, I tested against production, or I tested against staging site 1, but I should have tested against staging site 2. So the more of this we can automate, the more likely we're going to have repeatable, consistent results, and the more we'll be able to really gauge the effectiveness of our testing program and ultimately our automation program. So the one that we're going to focus on, because it's really kind of the low-hanging fruit here, is loading your application to the mobile device or devices. So as an example, we talk about building your application in your CI or CD platform, so continuous integration or continuous delivery platform. I'll use Jenkins as an example. Developers check in their code. You have a nightly or a daily or a weekly build that will compile that code and will deliver a built application file, either an IPA for iOS or APK for Android. Now you need to get that application to these remote devices to test on. Again, real devices. So you need to connect to the mobile testing platform, wherever that may be, whether it's in-house or externally in the cloud. You need to install that mobile application on the devices to be tested. And then the ultimate goal is to then kick off those automation unit or functional tests. So you want to extend the automation you're probably already doing today, which is building your application in, my example, Jenkins. You want to extend that to deliver the application to the real devices and then begin the actual testing. And the goals here are pretty simple. Save your test team effort to set up for a test and free them up to test things that don't lend themselves to automation, maybe more the actual look and feel of the application, something that you can only really test using an actual tester with a phone in their hands. Free them up to do more exploratory testing, maybe more negative testing, or free them up to do some of the higher value manual testing. All right. Now, let's look at the next trick. Making sure you can handle new features in the mobile operating system. With each release of Android or iOS, there comes new features and functionality. Some of it may be behind the scenes and not affect the user experience, while some of it is obviously directly aimed at increasing the usability or extension of the mobile device. It's your job as a developer or tester to make sure that your application continues to work properly with these mobile operating system changes. It's also imperative that your application takes advantage of the new functionality. Your users will expect it, and they will expect it to just work on their device. This means you need to be able to test those new features and updates to the mobile OS, as well as how they work with your application. This can be a daunting task if you're doing it manually. It adds to the complexity. Today, you may have 100 use cases. iOS releases some new features and functionality that you are going to take advantage of in your application, and now your number of test cases has grown to 200, 300. Right? So as much of this as you can automate as possible is better. The same amount of time, increase your test coverage. So specifically handling new features in mobile apps, we're going to look at iOS. So new OS features require your testing to ensure your application functions properly with them. The biggest, latest releases that everybody was talking about, still talking about, are the new iOS 10 features. So system application extensions, including SiriKit, right? Talking to Siri to send a text message to somebody. You don't actually have to open up WhatsApp or Messages or Slack or whatever messenger you're using. New iMessage applications and its own application store. New notification styles, updated widgets. All of these things your user will expect your application to take advantage of, and they will expect it to just work on their device. So why test them? Again, ensure your application takes advantage of them, and customers expect it to work regardless of the changes. And again, those changes may be very prominent to the user, like the new iOS 10 features that are listed here, or they could be more behind-the-scenes system. But your customers don't care. They want your application to work. So another quick poll. What new iOS 10 features are you utilizing? And this is a multiple checkbox. You can select more than one. Just kind of get a reading on what you guys are using. So Eric, what new iOS 10 features are you seeing people take advantage of in their applications?
I would say the number one would be notifications, followed by widgets. In the early iOS 10 applications that were released, those were the ones that we saw some need for testing. We did see a few iMessage apps. I'm still kind of waiting for that boom to happen, where we'll see a lot of iMessage-specific apps kind of coming out, and we can showcase how our devices can help in testing those.
Thanks. And does it seem to be industry-specific? I know that one of the big things was the system app extensions with Uber, being able to pick you up directly from Maps, or OpenTable being able to book you a reservation for dinner at some restaurant that's in the Maps application without actually opening the OpenTable application. Are you seeing anything be industry-specific that seems to be using these, or is it kind of all across the board?
I would say widget seems to be kind of that news stream specific type industry. ESPN for scores, or any kind of like push notifications you would regularly get to your phone. Using widget seems to be a very nice complement to that. Some people don't like getting excessive amounts of push notifications, but they are willing to use a widget to interact with that information you're trying to send them. So anything that has a lot of push notifications, a widget is a good spot for that. And as far as iMessage goes, I thought that was going to be industry specific, and maybe banking or sending payments, but I haven't really seen any industry-specific come out of the iMessage apps yet. And definitely for system app extensions, really what we're seeing right now is location-based type of applications that use any type of location services. It's very specific to that.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Eric. So let's take a look at what the poll says, and it looks like the majority, 42% of you, are either not using them or not sure. Next is notifications, and followed by widgets. So that kind of makes sense with what I think Eric is seeing out there. I know that everyone I know that's an iPhone user really likes the widgets, so they don't get constant push notifications. And it definitely does seem to be kind of news story like a Flipboard or score updates, news updates are really taking advantage of some of these new features. So as we said, your customers expect your application to work with those. Even though the actual implementation here is from Apple, it's a new iOS 10 feature, they expect your application to work properly with those. So it's very important that you actually test them as well. So a quick example of something that we see some people testing is the system app extensions. So now or previous to iOS 10, some functionality existed that enabled cross-app interaction. A good example was check deposit that fundamentally changed the way everyone did banking. Right? Nobody goes to the ATM anymore, or very few people. You can just do it from your phone. Right? You want to deposit a check, camera's automatically called, and you position the check, takes a picture, and deposits your money. So mobile banking app was making use of the native camera app on your phone. But now imagine instead of calling a system app from your app, you can actually invoke functionality from your app within a system app if you've added these appropriate app extensions. So what Apple did is opened up those APIs in iOS 10, available to anyone in more system apps to write your own app extensions to make your content available. As I mentioned, to go from maybe seeing restaurants and ratings to actually booking a reservation or calling an Uber without opening the application OpenTable or Uber to book that ride. So other examples, iMessage. Eric mentioned sending money. So maybe you get a message from a friend and they say, hey, you owe me $10. You can text them a payment directly through iMessage now. It will automatically call Venmo or PayPal or whatever application is tied in via these system app extensions. But it goes all the way through Maps and the phone and Siri. So Apple has really opened this up. And although it is an Apple functionality, your users expect your application to work with it. So you need to make sure that you test this. You can't just test sending payment anymore from your application itself. You need to test sending it from iMessage through your application that never actually really gets invoked. So it adds a whole layer of complexity and a bunch of additional use cases that has to be tested through. All right, let's move on to the next trick. So this might not be something you've thought of yet. It's working with secure Android apps. The Android operating system allows developers to disable functionality that many emulators and remote test platforms are unable to help test. This functionality is a security function that disables screen mirroring or sharing for certain pages or parts of your mobile application. Think about a retail banking application. They're, of course, going to be very security conscious. Android allows them to block screen sharing of either the entire application or maybe just of the login page, the balance page, maybe the profile page that has account numbers, things of that nature. This makes sure that only the intended viewer, the user with the mobile device physically in their hand, can see the screen content. Another use may be for HIPAA or PHI compliance for medical, financial, insurance organizations and their mobile applications. The possible uses of Android OS security feature called Is Secure, they're really endless. Developers can use it anywhere in their applications that they don't want to let people screen mirror or share that screen with other applications. You need a way to test this both manually and in an automated fashion. Being able to do so will help you ensure compliance both internally at your organization and also with any external regulatory bodies. You need to ensure your customers that their data is safe within your application. So we need to make sure that we can test this functionality here, specifically on Android. So secure Android apps can be difficult to test on remote devices due to that inability to screen mirror. So oftentimes, remote device solutions have used screen mirroring to let the tester see the device's screen. If a developer has an application that utilizes the secure Android functionality, they will not be able to see that screen. So that can make development and testing on emulators and remote devices very problematic. Again, why would you choose to use secure Android apps if it makes your testing more difficult? Well, it keeps your customers' data safe and secure. And again, it can help meet regulation and compliance goals of your organization and or your industry. And I think this is a feature that we're actually going to start seeing more often. People are starting to carry around their phone or their tablet and use it as a computer or desktop replacement. And because of this, it means that they're actually using their phone to do a lot of things that they may not have been comfortable doing before. Banking, sending money, keeping tabs on their personal finances, whether it's through an application or through a cloud service. So you need to be able to ensure your users that their data is safe, because it's now a walking computer that has access to everything that their computer had access to that generally sat inside their home or office. So I think that this feature is going to be used more and more frequently now. So you need to make sure you have a method to test it and that you do test it. All right, and the final trick we're going to cover today is dealing with environmental and data changes and data sets. So having to create a new test for each environment or service, like we talked about during the first trick, right? Setting up your test environment. Having to create a new test for each environment or service, again, maybe QA, staging 1, staging 2, production, becomes a burden, becomes hard to manage, and it's really a waste of resources. If your test is the same, and you want to just be able to reuse that across those multiple environments or services, that's ideal. That's the best solution. It cuts down on test creation and maintenance effort required by your team. Of course, at the same time, running tests using the same data over and over again is fine. It'll cover a lot of scenarios. But what if you could use the same test and just change the data being used, both as input, so maybe usernames and passwords, and also that you're validating, so maybe account balances, flight schedules, subscriber information. If you could use the same test and change that data with each test run or at whatever frequency you wanted, that would let you increase your test coverage by simply using a data set or a data source, not increasing the number of tests. So that same 100 tests could now really turn into 200, 300, 400 tests without making a single change to the test itself, which of course cuts back on test creation effort and ultimately cuts back on test maintenance effort required. Imagine testing multiple logins in your application, verifying proper account balance is visible, maybe doing just a basic valid and invalid login testing, right? Are users presented with the right error messages if they type in the wrong password? All of this can and should be tested using automation. So once your basic test automation project is implemented, you need to be able to deal with environment and data changes and updates. And this needs to be dynamic. You need to be able to take your test, maybe run it today on staging site 1. And next week, maybe you need to test it on staging site 2. So you need to have some forethought when you create these tests to enable that sort of dynamic changing and switching of data or environment updates. You need to maintain a single test repository, again, to cut down on test creation efforts, to cut down on your maintenance efforts that are required. You don't want to have a test repository for staging system 1, staging system 2, even production. It's best to have a single test repository that you just feed in the dynamically changing information. And this lends itself to having a single test result database for all iterations of a test, regardless of which environment and any data changes or updates. You don't want to have to dig through multiple databases with your test results, your pass-fail results, any sort of screenshots or videos you may have taken of your automated tests against these real mobile devices. You don't want to have to dig through for the test with first login, the test with a second login, the test against a first environment and second environment. Having a single test result database not only makes viewing those results and auditing them easier, it also helps with meeting any sort of compliance and having a single system of record for those results. Now, a couple of reasons we see people using non-static data, or could call it dynamic data, is it allows a single test or test set to be run using multiple data inputs and outputs or validations. It also limits the repetitive testing when only the data being used changes. We see clients that write very large test sets, 400 or 500 test cases, when it really could be cut down to maybe 150 or 200 and simply feed changing data in as necessary. And it lets you use that same test against multiple environments and just switch the target environment when needed. So you really need to put some forethought into this and make sure that as you build or as you expand your automation, then you think through how you're going to deal with these in different environments if you have them, or changes to any data that you'd like to actually push. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric for some demos actually, so that you can see how you can actually implement these 4 tricks that we just talked about.
Thanks, Chris. So as we mentioned in kind of the first trick on how to set up your test environment, part of that process is making sure that the same application is loaded onto all the mobile devices that you're testing on. So in the case of providing a tool like we do, we provide remote access to devices. So you have several devices that are cloud-based, and you may have testers that are located all over the world. But your build may happen in one central location, and you need to make sure that that particular application, when the build happens, is delivered to all those devices in an automated fashion. I know there were some questions about manual testing kind of floating around in the chat, and we see this a lot with manual testing as well, because it's an important first step in having that application delivered to these devices. And once that application is on there, you could run automated regression tests or build acceptance tests once that application is delivered, but also it makes that application available for doing manual testing and making sure that when you have that scheduled manual testing time, that that application is actually on that device and the correct application is being tested. Kind of while we're continuing to talk about this, I'll go ahead and play the demo. So what you can see here is a real device on the right-hand side of the screen. In the middle of the screen, we're selecting from different applications that are available to deliver to this application. Now, these applications are uploaded into our repository, and you can select them based on their bundle ID. The bundle ID allows you to upload that application manually to the phone, or excuse me, automatically to the phone. So what we're watching right now is this command, which is delivering this application to the phone. And pretty soon, right next to that ESPN application on the phone, you will see an application that we're automatically delivering. It'll verify, and once that does happen, then you can continue on with a number of other automated tests. So you can continue on with a build acceptance test or a regression test. Or like we talked about earlier, now that the application is on that phone, you could continue with a manual test case or a manual testing suite. So moving on to the next demo, demo number 2. This is where we talked about the iOS 10 system extensions and different new features inside of iOS 10. So I know right away we had a question about what is new in notification. So we can cover that as kind of part of this segment. So notifications look pretty much the same in iOS 10. They do behave a little bit differently. So there are swipe gestures that are now a part of notifications. And notifications do show up on the lock screen for iOS and let you interact with them in the lock screen. You can swipe them from the lock screen and go straight to a different set of menu items, which is different than notifications were in iOS 9 and earlier. So this particular demo that we're talking about for iOS 10 system extensions, we're actually showing you how to interact with a widget. And this is something that was previously difficult to do with iOS. iOS was very closed down, at an object level, so it was difficult to create automated tests that would allow you to interact with system-level applications for iOS. So if we take a look here, what you'll see is a real device on the right here, and you can see our workflow is running through swiping to the widget screen, and what we're doing is verifying that we're actually at the widget screen here by that search bar. And once we create that verification, we're then going to begin to interact with our particular widget, which in this case is the ESPN widget. There's a show more button, so we want to hit that, and we want to see that there's actually more scores available. And then we want to pick a particular score on there that can actually launch us into our application. And once we're in our application, we can verify that we're actually at the application, and that handoff between the system level application of iOS and our application is actually happening. And as you can imagine, there's a number of iterations that you can do here to make sure that, as your customers expect, your widgets, your notifications are actually launching your application and allowing you to interact accurately with your application once that's complete. Moving on to the third scenario that Chris talked about, working with secure Android apps. So this is really a limitation that Android provides. It's a limitation and actually a great security feature to allow screen mirroring to be not done on specific pages or inside specific applications. So you can imagine trying to stream your Android device and it won't allow you to actually screen mirror. And that's how some tools actually use remote devices, is they use this screen mirroring feature. So if you are using a remote set of devices in the cloud and you try to upload your application that includes a secure screen, it actually won't allow you to stream that across the internet. So your remote testers would be unable to use any type of secure app if that is how the particular tool is showing you the device's screen. So taking a look at our tool here for the demo, what we're actually going to show is Chase Mobile, their banking application, which uses a secure screen. So this login page is indeed secure. You'll see we're interacting with it. We've created an automated test that interacts with the login page. It goes to find ATM. It locates an ATM. And you can see here kind of the differences between iOS and Android, where right now we're going to jump from Chase Mobile's app actually into Google Maps to verify a specific location. You'll see the location on the screen there. That's actually where that real device is located. So this gives you an example of a test case that you could run that's interacting with that secure page. It's not necessarily logging in, but there still are many test cases that will need to be handled that would need that secure page and need access to that. And moving on to demo 4 here. Chris, would you like to add?
Yes, thank you. So demo 4, again, the fourth topic was dealing with those environmental and data changes. What we're going to look at a demo of is using dynamic data or a data set. And this data set is actually going to run through 2 different departure and arrival scenarios on a single test through the Southwest Airlines application you'll see here in just a moment. So I start my test, and I'm going to go into flight status. I want to check the flight status here, and I want to use one test, but I want to run through 2, 3, 20, and 100 different scenarios to make sure that the proper schedule shows up or the proper error shows up if I don't actually have a route on that day from the selected airport to the selected airport. So I want to use that single test. So you'll see here, the first is going to scroll up, find my first departure airport. It's then going to move to my arrival airport, sorry. And it's going to then do the same thing. And you can watch this, and I'll talk about how these data sets can be used. So there's a few ways those data sets can be used with this platform. The data set can reside inside of the Sigos Mobile Testing platform. It can also reside outside. So Sigos Mobile Testing can reach outside itself. So as a quick aside, you'll see here it's jumping back to the main page. It's going to go back in and check a new flight status for new airports. So the data set can also reside outside. Maybe it's in a database, it's in an Excel sheet, it's coming in an RSS feed, or even from a website. You can use data from anywhere, reach outside the system. I have a client that actually drives their tests through an Excel file. They use some different APIs and some Java methods to actually reach outside, grab that data so they can update that data whenever they want in that Excel file without making a single change to their test. They've got approximately 500 or 600 tests running that way. And using that data, it really scales out to almost 1,500 to 2,000 different tests because they're changing data dynamically. Now, the other great thing that we talked about was you need to have that single test result repository, which we have here. So even though it's a single test, this went through 2 different sets of data. The test result is all going to be in one location, and we're going to see the result for the first set of data and for the second. So having that single repository is awesome. It's really important, and especially if you need to have a single system of record. All right, so kind of the final trick is to use a real device cloud platform, our Sigos Mobile Testing. It allows for manual or fully automated options. We saw some questions about manual testing. Also, it gives you a cloud-based library of real mobile devices so that all of your testers have access to a consistent set of real mobile devices. Make sure your tool has flexible test scripting options. We mentioned in that very first slide that there's a lot of knowledge about automation and scripting for desktop. It doesn't always relate and transfer to mobile. So make sure that the tool you select has these flexible scripting options and has a test automation engine of some sort. Having that intelligent reporting and a single repository is key. And of course, the more and more we hear about mobile development, we're hearing more agile. So make sure there's integration points that fit into your agile process. All right. So I think we'll turn over to questions now.
Okay, great. Thanks. All right, Chris and Eric will now be taking questions from the audience. You can continue asking questions by typing them in that field beneath the panels there and clicking submit. All right, so first things first, this is about the tool that you were just demonstrating. This person wants to know, you can handle single repository from Excel also. What's different about your tool?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you can handle a single repository from Excel or from other tools as well for those test results. Excel is, of course, just going to give you data. It's going to give you, generally we'll see people put pass, fail, maybe the time it took to run the test, who ran the test. Our tool will also give you screenshots and object information. So you're not only going to see did the test pass or fail, but if it passed, or more importantly, if it failed, what was the user experience? What did they see on that device screen? So if they tried to log in on an iPhone to your banking application and they got an error that maybe said, the system is down for maintenance, you'll see a screenshot of exactly what they saw when that test or that step failed. So you're going to get more information in an easier to navigate method than just a single Excel file.
Okay, that's good to know. Thanks. This person wants to know, which automation tool were you using? Can you provide some more info about what everyone saw in those demos?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you saw there was Sigos Mobile Testing Enterprise. It is the interface into the real mobile devices in the Sigos device cloud, and it enables you to do both manual testing or automated testing, as you saw there. It has a bunch of flexible scripting options ranging from a recorder that is not coordinate-based, so you can record interacting with objects within your application and not worry that the test is brittle because, it is not coordinate-based. You can also use a drag-and-drop interface or do things programmatically via an API. We also support creating tests inside of UFT, or Unified Functional Tester, against these real devices, or driving your Appium tests against our real devices in the Sigos Mobile Testing Cloud. But what you saw there was the Sigos Mobile Testing Enterprise application interacting and testing against devices in that Sigos device cloud.
Okay, thank you for that additional information. Next question, how can I work with my continuous build system? What systems do you work with?
Yeah, it's a good question, because we mentioned being able to take your application and install it to real mobile devices. That's super important. So we actually, I mentioned Jenkins. That's actually the one that we see the most. I don't know, Eric, if you've heard many others. I see Jenkins a lot. Every once in a while I hear people using NuGet or using TeamCity. But we have an integration with Jenkins, an actual plugin for Jenkins. But we will work with any system because we have both a command line interface you can use as well as an API that you can call on from any other tool that you might be using. So even if you have a homebrew or homegrown continuous integration or continuous build platform, that's okay. You can still interact with our devices in our cloud.
Okay, thanks. Is there any report that's generated after you complete test execution?
Yeah, so there is. At the end of the test execution, you'll be presented with step-by-step screenshots and timing values for every step. So, for example, the last demo you saw where we walked through the airline's application, we entered in some data, we validated, and then did it again. You would see screenshots for each step, so you know exactly what your users are seeing when they're using your application or your site. And then we also show you how long things took. So you can find out how long does it take from the time a user clicks on login until they're presented with the welcome screen and they've been logged in. So it's a full visual walkthrough. It's stored in a private website that's visible only to you and your team or your organization. And that data stays there forever. The screenshots, the timing data, full audit trail of who ran the tests and when they ran them.
All right, thank you. This is a question I've seen a few people ask. Do you have to use real phones to test applications, or do you supply emulators we can use to test on?
That's a question we get a lot. That's a great question. So we actually only provide access to real phones and tablets. We don't provide access to emulators. Those are readily available through Apple, Google, other venues. We only provide access to real devices. We believe there is a time and place for emulation and simulation. But we also believe that the earlier on in your development and testing process you can start using and testing against real phones and tablets, the better off you are, because you'll catch those bugs and those issues when they're cheaper to fix. Right? It's going to be less costly. So we only provide access to real devices. We provide the devices, we procure them, we manage any sort of cellular data plans, network plans. All you need to worry about is testing and creating those automated tests or manual tests.
Great, thanks. How can I test my pre-production iOS application?
So another great one. Those of you that are in development or testing iOS applications are familiar with the need to create a provisioning file that includes the UDID or unique identifier of the iOS device that you're going to test on. Now, that may seem like it's not something that's possible for remote devices, but in fact it is. What Sigos will do for you is actually allow you to sign your application, your IPA file. We will automatically sign your application with our profile so that it includes that UDID or unique identifier of the device you're going to test on that, again, is remote to you. It's in the Sigos cloud. And in that manner, you'll be able to install your application and do both manual testing or automated testing at an object level using UI automation, which is that framework or tool from Apple itself.
Okay, thanks for that answer. This is a question, again, about the tool that was being shown in the demos. Does Sigos have a built-in scheduler to launch test and test suites?
Yes, that's a great question as well. Yes, we do. So we have the ability to create a schedule within the Sigos Mobile Testing Enterprise application that you saw there. So maybe you say, okay, I know I have a new build of my website, and this is when we see it used the most often, is when the application itself isn't changing, maybe back-end services are or data are changing, or you're testing a website that you don't need to load to the phone. You can schedule that test to run at whatever frequency you want. If you want to run it once a day at midnight, you want to run it once a week, it's totally up to you. It's built into the platform. There's a built-in scheduling utility where you say, I want to run these tests against these devices at this date and time, and at what recurrence. So maybe every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, maybe once a week. Again, it's completely customizable. We also have an API that you can use to trigger from any other tool that may have a scheduler built in, again, like Jenkins or some other continuous integration platform.
Okay, thanks. Do you have a mobile test lab? Or can you set up a test lab on a user's site that features custom choices?
Yes, yeah, so we can. We have flexible deployment options. We have the ability to either host things for you, right? So you don't have to take on any burden of managing devices, nothing in your data center. It's completely cloud SaaS solution. You subscribe to access these devices that are hosted by Sigos, or you can host things behind your firewall if you need to for security reasons or for access reasons. It's completely customizable, and it's something that we could discuss with you further and talk about those different options. But we offer both, depending on what your needs are.
Okay, good to know. Thanks. On a secure Android device, is it possible to test screenshots or mirroring?
Yeah, so it is. It all depends on how the developers have actually used that secure Android functionality. Where we see people running into problems is if they're using a solution that uses that screen mirroring just to allow the testers to see the remote device screen. They can't because screen mirroring has been disabled by the developer themselves. Our solution does not use that screen mirroring, so that secure Android functionality does not limit testers' ability to actually see that device screen and test.
Okay. This is another question about using actual devices instead of emulators. This person wants to know, how do we run our tests on real devices instead of the simulators?
Yeah, so since we only provide access to real devices, there are no simulators and emulators in the Sigos cloud. And again, I think there's a time and place for simulators and emulators, but by the time the testing team or the QA team has access to the application or site to test, I think at that point it's time to test against real devices. So we only provide access to real devices.
Okay. Thanks for that clarification. Can you use the cloud devices to perform QA for responsive websites?
Yes, we can. So the cloud devices can be used to test responsive websites, mobile applications, whether they're native or hybrid, even system applications. It doesn't really matter to us. We provide you that access, and you can test anything that the phone can navigate to through either a Wi-Fi connection or a cellular connection, because all of the devices we provide access to, all the devices you saw in those demos, are real voice, data, text messaging plans. It's a fully functioning phone that you have remote access to.
All right, thank you. How soon do you support new devices and operating systems so that we can test the new OS functions?
Yeah, it's another great question we get a lot. So new devices, so new hardware devices are available on day one. So the day that they're available to the public, they're available in our cloud. New operating systems, in fact, we can provide access to beta operating systems. So we had customers testing on iOS 10 beta prior to it being publicly released. So we have day one support for new hardware, and we actually have pre-release support for new operating systems.
Great, thank you. Well, that looks like that's about all the time we have for today for questions, so I'll hand it back over to you guys.
All right, thank you. So again, thank you everybody for taking the time to attend. If you'd like to learn more, we had some great questions there, and unfortunately some that we didn't have time to answer. But if you'd like to learn more, here's some links for you. So Keynote Mobile Testing recently merged with Sigos, and we're in a transition period. So for now, you can find info on our platform, again, Mobile Testing Enterprise at www.keynote.com. But please also bookmark www.sigos.com. Our product will be reflected on the new parent company's website, Sigos, in the coming months. So more information about Sigos, again, www.sigos.com. Bookmark that because our new product, new branding will slowly be moved over to that parent company's website.
All right, thank you for that additional information, Chris. Well, that will end this web seminar for today. I'd like to thank our speakers, Chris Karnacki and Eric Elkins, for their time, and of course, Keynote for sponsoring this web seminar. And a special thank you goes out to all of you in the audience also for spending this time with us today. So have a great rest of the day, and we hope to see you at a future web seminar. Thank you.